Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next The Dragon Prince video. This is going to be my review for The Dragon Prince Book 1 Moon, the novelization. So this came out a few weeks ago. It was a little delayed in kind of shipping out to me, but I finally got it, finally read it, and here are my thoughts on it. So first of all, quick look at the book itself. It's just a pretty small paperback book. As you can see there, Dragon Prince Book 1 Moon, written by Ihaz and Ihaz. So it's written by Aaron Ihaz, of course, and also Melanie Megani Ihaz. So that makes sense. The back of the book says, written by Aaron Ihaz and Melanie Ihaz, the first canon novel based on the Netflix original series finally gives fans the full story. And I think that's the thing, that was the appeal with this book. When the description came out for this as like a product, the idea was that this is like an expansion effectively on book 1. It's not just a simple novelization with no new information. There was going to be some extra stuff in this. And while it's true, it's not true in the way you sort of think it is. There are some new interesting pieces of information which I'll talk about here. But none of it is so huge that I think it's like you need to go out of your way to buy this book just for it. Because it's so sort of scattered across the book, it's just here and there. The book in general I don't think really expands on all that much. It's a pretty standard kind of kids novelization of the Dragon Prince Book 1. I'd put the sort of tone of the book as sort of being kind of middle grade level. It's not detailed enough to be YA, and it's not so basic that it's just a full-on kids book. So it's somewhere in the middle, and I suppose that's like middle grade level, and that's the way the book is. It's not particularly descriptive for the most part. There are a few times when it does get a little bit more descriptive, and I wish the book was kind of almost written more consistently like that. But most of the time, it's a pretty standard retelling of the show. They very, very fast-paced get through a lot of those episodes. It kind of highlights that, you know, Book 1 of the Dragon Prince is, what, 9 episodes? This gets through them so quickly. Some of those middle episodes between the opening section and then the section of the Caldera are just like a quick chapter, like done in about 10 pages. It really kind of highlights that, you know, it doesn't spend any extra time expanding on all that much. So I suppose, what are the main points that it does expand on? What are some of the new things? The one that I think will immediately stand out to most people is basically the very start, so the prologue of the book. It's the same prologue that we have, but expanded. The idea of there are 6 primal sources: the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth, the sky, and the ocean. And it says here, every living creature in Xadia was born with the gift of magic, a spark inside connected to one of the 6 primal sources. From the greatest dragon to the smallest insect, magic flowed in their veins. But humans were different, humans were flawed, they were born without this gift. Back in ancient times, the humans struggled to survive in the world, while the Xadian creatures thrived. Many humans perished from starvation, others died fighting one another over the scarce resources. And then here's the properly unique thing. I think they frame it a little bit different, that you can see sort of why you'd be sympathetic towards humans as being like the only living beings in the world of the Dragon Prince that aren't born connected to magic. Like, what's up with that? There has to be a reason for that, surely. And so it being presented that way is good. But the next bit, I'm kind of like, wait, why wasn't this included in the story somewhere? This seems like very important information. Unicorns were always the most selfless of the Xadian beings. There came a time when, filled with pity, they desperately wanted to help the struggling humans. After all, it was not the humans' choice to have been born without magic. But the first elves were wary. They warned the unicorns that kindness was not always returned with kindness. It would be a mistake to trust the species. After all, if humans were supposed to use magic, they would have been born with it. However, the unicorns' compassion ran deep, and they could not be convinced. So despite the elves' warning, the unicorns bestowed the ways of magic onto the humans. They gifted a few wise humans with powerful orbs called the Primal Stones, which contained vast magical energy. Then they taught them to draw runes to attract and focus the stone's power, and to speak ancient words used by dragons to release the energy as magical spells. So, they talk about then humans had the ability to take care of themselves and end their own suffering. They fed their hungry, cared for their poor, and healed their sick. As they thrived, they elevated humankind in other ways, learning about the world and the stars and the arts. They created songs and poetry and other beautiful things. But, of course, with it, they used this is where dark magic comes in. They harnessed the magic from other creatures. It became known as new magic, or the seventh source dark magic. And the big thing, the twist in all of this is perhaps the most valuable and sought after prize of all was a unicorn's horn. Eventually the humans hunted the unicorns until they disappeared completely from Zadia. How true, I suppose, in the series is that at this point? Are there no unicorns left at all, or is there a few still left? And it obviously gives a hint to, there's probably more to the full ancient history of the world that we need to get back to with regards to why humans aren't born with magic. But then through Callum, we sort of learn that you can actually awaken an arcanum and potentially multiple arcanums within yourself to connect to that magic. So what's the full story there, basically? So I think the other thing here is that the elves and dragons were disgusted and outraged by what they saw. They were convinced the annihilation of humans was necessary and inevitable. But at the last moment, a daughter of the elven leader proposed the merciful compromise, and that is capital M, capital C. So this is, I suppose, specifically known in history as the merciful compromise. She asked that humans be allowed to move and settle to the lands to the west beneath a half moon. The dragon queen, who was called Luna Tenebris, rendered judgment that was both kind and cruel. Humans were cast out, but they were spared, and so the continent was divided in two. And this prologue is written by Aravos of the First Elves. So it gives us more insight into the first elves, ancient elves. Okay, Aravos was one of them. A few things fit together there, but primarily the whole idea here is just the unicorns. We didn't know about the unicorns and them basically inventing the stuff that allows human to use magic at all, and then being sort of betrayed, I suppose, as we went forward. So there's a few extra little pieces of information there. Beyond that, the only, I would say, notable new piece of information that I was sort of surprised just isn't in the show is 2 chapters that reference basically the same thing. And it's related to kind of Viren, Soren, and I suppose that family in general. So this is a kind of in chapter 17, Viren goes to the butterflies, and it says here, the butterflies were sunray monarchs he had captured near the border of Zadia. He'd been breeding the creatures for years. Viren opened the screen and placed one weathered hand inside the terrarium. A single butterfly landed on his forefinger, flapping its vibrant purple and yellow wings. He used his other hand to stroke the delicate wings. Every time he enacted this ritual, Viren was reminded of the first time he had performed it. He remembered his relief when it worked, restoring his appearance. He'd remembered how he'd been filled with hope, certainty even, and that this world would change everything. He remembered hurrying home, ready to be forgiven, and even more clearly, he remembered the bitter hole left in his soul when Lissa told him his restored appearance changed nothing. Even though dark magic had helped their family, saving their son's life, she seemed to fear him and hate him now. And he knew he could never repair that. That's... I don't think we ever knew that it's obviously a reference to Soren, as I'll get to in a second. That Soren was terribly sick or ill when he was younger, and Viren, the first time he used dark magic and sort of turned himself all kind of weird looking, was when he used it to save Soren's life when he was younger. And obviously the way Viren's looks changed, it obviously disgusted... I guess Lissa is their mother, and because of this and the dynamic surrounding this situation, it turned out it wasn't about his appearance. But I guess you have to read into this a little bit more, and potentially the idea of Soren, I think they're sort of implying that Soren was either about to die or did die, and somehow Viren brought him back to life, or saved him, and Lyssa viewed that as sort of being this sort of unnatural thing, and that's part of why Lyssa, the mother, left. And then later on, chapter 23 at the start, it's Soren bounded up the tower's stone steps, taking them 2 at a time. He had been a sickly child, but that was years ago. These days, he was never one to waste an opportunity for exercise. So, just a sense of like, oh, I don't think we knew that ever. That Soren was a kind of, I suppose, weak child when he was younger. So it gives a sense for, I suppose, he was dying when he was young, and that's the significance of what Viren did. It just is a kind of important little dynamic that I'm surprised they didn't touch on in the show. I'm gonna guess it was potentially a kind of cut scene or something like that for time, but it seems kind of weird. Beyond that, I don't think there's really all that much else. There's a scene later on when Viren shows Runan the mirror. And it says here, Runan shook his head in disbelief. This relic had one purpose, to protect the world from an ancient and mysterious threat. So, it's just a tiny little bit of extra insight. We know what that is now, and that Aravos was obviously locked in there for a reason, but like that the mirror specifically is there and was in the, I suppose, where the Dragon King and Queen slept. That was there for like a reason. And it was to protect from him. So again, I think we're still waiting for that like full reveal to come out about like why is Aravos's like name and identity sort of all weird and like no one can look up information on him or whatever, that sort of stuff. But in general, it's very much just the book. There's other like tiny little bits of information, but I don't think it's anything particularly substantial. Nothing to where I would say you need to get this book because it's so packed with extra information. I basically just read out to you the 2 key points. The Viren and Soren thing of like Soren being ill when he was younger and Viren using dark magic to save him, and then the prologue bit about the unicorns. They're the only 2 substantially new pieces of information in this book. Everything else is just like very, very minor, like Rayla like basically hints at the idea that she doesn't like herself in her like kind of moon elf, kind of moon shadow form, so she doesn't go into it that often and that sort of stuff, which explains, I suppose, why we've only seen it like one time, even though there's potentially, I suppose, been times for her to use it before. And other than that, it's just, I suppose, kind of information that we've maybe got in terms of like character names from like book 2 or 3 that they sort of use again here in terms of like Runan's husband, Athari. That I don't think got revealed in the show until like season 2 or 3, or it was like in the aftermath, like interviews after book 1, but it's said directly here in the book, that connection and so on. There's just a few little things like that. But similarly, there's also stuff like the book states that Ezran is 8 years old, but in the show, the canon age for Ezran is 10. So it's this weird dynamic where, to some degree, I suppose this is based on like early drafts of scripts or something, which kind of doesn't make a ton of sense given that like this is the book 1 book and it's coming out like years after the first season. So like what's going on? It feels like just the Dragon Prince, everything is sort of delayed in a way, that we have so few merchandise for this show, even though there's 3 seasons have come out. But that's just the way the show is for some reason. Like I don't think there's been an update on the situation with the show in months. Like what was it? The last season was in December, I think. So it's been like 6 months with no information about like if the show is continuing. We know they have a plan for like 3 or 4 more seasons and more stuff beyond that. We know the entire sort of premise of the Dragon Prince was that it was meant to be this sort of multimedia project that would involve books, comics, video games, and stuff like that. And so far, there's only been like 2 pieces of like merchandise really released. There's some Funko Pops, and then the book 1 Moon book, and then this other book, Callum's Spell book. And like of these 2 books, I would definitely say the Spell book I think is the more interesting one. That you should check this one out more than you should check this one out, because like the thing here is that like 95% of the experience of reading this book is literally just a direct recap of the show. with not a lot of substance. It was just like, okay, I know this material, let's just get through it while keeping my eye out for new information. And like I said, there's only like 3 or 4 little moments that really stood out to me in my reading of like what a 275 page book. That gives you a little bit of an insight. Thankfully, it's not a particularly expensive book. I think it was only like €8 or something like that. But like I said, a book like this to me is much more interesting with the art inside, and I reviewed this before. This covers more than just the first book as well. But you know, where is the rest of the merchandise? I think we know the book 2 Sky novelization is coming soon. The first graphic novel series is coming in September, and there's an art book coming as well. So there is stuff coming. I just wish there was an update on the show so we knew what was happening with season 4. Now, I do believe season 4 is... at one of the Comic-Cons they mentioned that, like, here's the roadmap for the show, and it showed the idea that season 4 and 5, I think, are meant to be considered like the Dragon Prince with a subtitle. So my guess is that it's potentially some sort of a time skip type thing. Just because we've sort of solved the plot of the first section of the story of like, we've brought Zim back to his mother, so like the Dragon Prince aspect of the plot has sort of been resolved for the most part now. There has to be a secondary plot that kind of comes into play now at this point. So that's why the next book, which I think is meant to be Earth, is it? If I remember the roadmap that they put up correctly, it probably will be a kind of relatively big reveal when it finally gets announced, because it's meant to be a sort of time skip. But yeah, that's my review for the Dragon Prince novelization for Book 1 Moon. In the comments, let me know if you have any questions or comments, or if you've read the book yourself, what your thoughts were. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.